Millionaire leaves pregnant black woman over his mother's lies. Next morning, divorce papers destroy him Part 2. Sabrina stood on the balcony of her quiet home, her hands gripping the rail as little Grace chased a ball across the yard. The late afternoon light touched her green dress, but her thoughts were far from calm. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, the name on the screen making her chest tighten. Dorian. He had been calling for weeks, sending letters, showing up at her office, all pleading for a chance to explain, to be forgiven. Her heart wavered as she looked at her daughter's laughter below, innocent and free of the pain that had once broken her. Sabrina's breath caught as the phone buzzed again. Could she ever trust the man who had once chosen his mother's lies over her truth? Or was it too late to let him near the life she had built from nothing but heartbreak and strength? If you were in Sabrina's shoes, would you give Dorian a second chance? If you think Dorian deserves Sabrina's forgiveness, hit the subscribe button. If you can stand people like Eleanor, comment, "Everyone deserves respect." Welcome back to our amazing viewers. We'd love to know, where in this beautiful world are you watching from? If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. Your support is the fuel that drives our passion to create compelling stories that matter. Each subscription tells us we're on the right path, and every comment reminds us why we do what we do. Before we continue, let us pray. May your day be filled with moments of joy, and may peace settle gently in your heart. Whatever challenges you're facing, may you find the strength to overcome them, and may tomorrow bring you closer to your dreams. Get ready because another captivating story is coming your way, one that will inspire and enlighten you. Remember, you are loved, and you are always welcome in our community. Whether you're catching up on our previous videos or eagerly waiting for what's next, know that you're part of something special here. Now, let's continue. Dorian sat in the small waiting room, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. It had been years since he faced Sabrina in a space that wasn't a courtroom or a chance encounter. Now, he was here voluntarily, with no legal papers or lawyers between them, just a therapist's office and the hope that she might finally listen. When Sabrina entered, her face gave nothing away. She took the chair farthest from him, placing her bag neatly at her feet. Her silence was louder than any outburst. Dorian's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to tell her how regret had gnawed at him every night, but the therapist gestured for him to start slowly. His voice cracked as he explained the work he had done on himself, the counseling, the late-night journaling, and the mentors he sought out. He admitted to the arrogance that once blinded him, to the selfish choices that shattered their marriage. He placed a sealed envelope on the table, a letter he had written for her, filled with the words he couldn't trust his trembling voice to deliver. Sabrina listened, her eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer comfort, but she didn't walk out either. That was enough for him. At home, Sabrina tucked the letter into a drawer without reading it. She told herself she didn't need to see his words. She had heard promises before. Still, when the house grew quiet after Grace fell asleep, her fingers hovered over the drawer handle. What if he really had changed? What if his words weren't just another performance? The thought unsettled her more than the memory of betrayal. Because change meant possibility. Possibility meant risk. Grace, meanwhile, had begun to ask questions. "Mommy, why did Daddy come with us today?" she whispered after one of their therapy sessions where Dorian had been present. Her wide eyes carried no judgment, only curiosity. Sabrina hesitated, unsure how much truth a child should hold. "He wants to learn how to be part of your life," she finally answered. "Does that mean he's staying forever?" Grace asked. Sabrina pulled her daughter close, smoothing her curls. "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but we'll take it step by step." For Dorian, those steps became letter pages filled with apologies, memories, and explanations. He mailed them weekly, never asking for a reply. Some Sabrina read. Some she tore in half before finishing the first line. But each one chipped at the wall she had built around her heart. Visits followed. At first, brief and structured. Dorian showing up for family therapy sessions, sitting stiffly in the chair across from them, answering questions with unusual patience. The sessions were difficult, raw, and full of pauses that carried more weight than words. When Grace spoke, however, her innocence cut through the heaviness. "Daddy, why did you make Mommy cry before?" she once asked, her small voice steady in the quiet room. Dorian swallowed hard, unable to hide from the truth. "Because I made choices that hurt her, Grace. Choices I wish I could take back." Sabrina glanced at him, searching for signs of pretense, but his eyes were wet, and his voice unguarded. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to remind her that he was human. At night, Sabrina lay awake, torn between the history that scarred her and the possibility of something new. Her love for Grace made her protective, unwilling to invite chaos back into their lives. Yet, deep inside, a sliver of her remembered the man who once made her laugh until her cheeks hurt, the man who had dreamed with her before ambition consumed him. Her friends didn't make the choice easier. Some told her to shut the door firmly, to protect her progress and never look back. Others whispered that forgiveness could be healing if handled carefully. But no one carried her heart. No one felt the pull of unfinished love. The more Dorian showed up, the heavier her conflict became. He wasn't forcing his way back. He was steady, patient, letting time prove him. Therapy sessions grew more layered. His letters are more vulnerable. His visits were less about pleading for her attention and more about sitting quietly, showing that he could simply exist without demanding. Grace noticed. "Daddy doesn't shout anymore," she said one evening, while Sabrina tucked her into bed. "He just listens." That small observation startled Sabrina, because she had noticed too. One Saturday morning, Sabrina opened one of his letters she had ignored for weeks. Inside, Dorian had written about the night Grace was born. He described the panic he felt when the nurse handed him their tiny daughter, how clumsy he felt trying to cradle her fragile body, and how Sabrina's calm voice guided him through the fear. "That was the first moment I realized I wasn't invincible," the letter ended. "I should have remembered that more often. I should have remembered you." The paper blurred as tears filled Sabrina's eyes. She pressed the letter to her chest, furious at herself for letting his words move her. But it wasn't just words anymore. It was the therapy sessions, the quiet presence, and the way Grace lit up whenever he walked into the room. And now Sabrina found herself at a crossroads. She didn't trust easily, not after the wounds he left. But she couldn't deny that part of her longed to believe. The plea for redemption had been made. The question now was whether her heart could open without breaking again. Sabrina wasn't one to leave things unsaid anymore. The years she spent piecing herself back together taught her the importance of boundaries and lines that must be respected if she was ever going to let Dorian remain in their lives. So, when he asked to meet at a neutral cafe, she came prepared. She arrived with a small notebook, her pen ready. Dorian looked nervous when she placed it on the table. "I've written down the terms," she said simply, her eyes steady on his. "No shortcuts," she began. "You don't get to walk in and pretend like nothing happened. You'll need to show me change, not just say it. Second, you cannot intrude into my work life. My career is not your stepping stone, and I won't let it be shaken by your presence. Third, every promise you make must be lived, not written. If Grace is to have a father, she needs consistency, not grand gestures." Dorian listened, his jaw tight but his eyes focused. "I accept all of it," he replied after a pause. "Words are easy," Sabrina said, closing the notebook. "Actions are harder." Their therapy sessions soon reflected this new clarity. The room was often tense, filled with confessions and frustrations they had avoided for years. Sabrina admitted how abandoned she felt during their marriage, not just in the physical sense but in spirit, how his ambition once left her raising their daughter almost alone. "You were there in body," she told him one evening, "but your mind was somewhere else. Building empires, chasing respect, leaving me with silence." Dorian lowered his head, the weight of her truth pressing heavily. "I thought I was providing," he said. "But I see now I was hiding behind success. I didn't know how to be present." The therapist let the silence linger, allowing them both to sit in the discomfort. It was Grace who broke that silence more often than not. Her questions cut straight through the careful layers they built. "Daddy, why didn't you live with us anymore?" she asked during one session. Dorian shifted uncomfortably. "Because I made mistakes, Grace. I hurt your mom, and I had to leave." "But you're here now?" she asked, her voice hopeful. "Yes," he said softly. "If you want me to be." Sabrina's chest tightened at those words. For all the wounds between them, Grace's innocence remained the most fragile piece of the puzzle. She was both shield and bridge, forcing them to face truths they might have avoided without her presence. Outside of therapy, Sabrina kept her guard up. She reminded Dorian constantly that one kind gesture didn't erase years of pain. When he brought flowers to the house, she placed them on the porch rather than the dining table. When he offered to cover Grace's school tuition, she politely refused, insisting that financial power wouldn't buy him trust. "You're not going to win us back with money or charm," she told him plainly. "I don't want to," he answered. "I want to earn it the hard way." That hard way meant showing up every week, every session, and every quiet moment that might otherwise tempt him to give up. One night after therapy, Sabrina stayed back to speak with the therapist alone. "Part of me is afraid of giving him too much space," she admitted. "If he hurts us again, I'll have no one to blame but myself." "That fear is natural," the therapist said gently. "But notice how you're not bending your boundaries. You're setting conditions, and he's choosing to meet them. That's different from before." Those words echoed in her mind over the following weeks. Maybe she was stronger now. Maybe the walls she had built weren't prisons, but safeguards. Still, the therapy sessions remained a battlefield of old wounds. At one point, Sabrina confronted him about a business trip years ago, when he left her caring for a newborn while he celebrated deals in another city. "Do you know how many nights I sat in that apartment, praying you'd come home early? Do you know how many times I cried alone because I couldn't let the baby hear me break down?" Dorian's hands shook. "I was blind. I thought winning out there meant winning for us. But I see now, I was losing the only thing that mattered." Grace tilted her head, looking between them. "Does that mean you love Mommy now?" Dorian exhaled, tears brimming. "I always loved her. I just didn't know how to show it the right way." Sabrina's eyes flickered, caught between skepticism and the undeniable pull of truth in his voice. The boundaries remained firm, though. Dorian couldn't call late at night. He couldn't drop by unannounced. He couldn't buy his way into their schedule. Each step forward had to be earned slowly, with patience. Even Grace, young as she was, seemed to understand the rules. When Dorian asked if he could come to her school recital, she ran to Sabrina first. "Is it okay if Daddy comes?" she whispered, as if the decision belonged to her mother alone. Sabrina hesitated, then nodded. "If he follows the rules, yes." The recital came, and for the first time in years, Dorian sat in the audience, not as a stranger, but as a father trying to reclaim a place he once lost. Sabrina watched from the aisle, her heart heavy with both pride and fear. Grace spotted him in the crowd and waved, her smile brighter than the stage lights. It was a moment Sabrina couldn't ignore. No grand gestures, no sweeping apologies, just a man quietly sitting in the audience, letting his daughter's joy take center stage. For Sabrina, it was a reminder. Boundaries didn't just keep pain away. Sometimes they allowed new beginnings to grow carefully, step by step. Atlanta had a way of talking. Whispers traveled faster than truth, and soon the city's social circles were buzzing with speculation about Sabrina and Dorian. Every dinner party, every gallery opening, every fundraiser seemed to echo with the same question. Were they reconciling? "Did you hear she let him come to Grace's recital?" one woman murmured over champagne. "They say he's been spotted near her neighborhood more than once," another added. "It's only a matter of time before she forgives him completely." Sabrina heard the gossip secondhand but didn't need confirmation. She could feel the shift when she walked into certain rooms, smiles that felt too curious, handshakes that lingered a moment too long, conversations that paused as she approached. She hated it. At lunch with her closest friends, the subject surfaced more directly. "I'm worried for you," one of them said, her fork barely touching her salad. "You've rebuilt so much. Don't risk it all for someone who already proved he could break you." Another chimed in. "Men like Dorian don't change overnight. Be careful. You've come too far to fall back into old wounds." Sabrina listened, her expression calm, but inside she wrestled with the conflict. She knew their concerns came from love. Still, she couldn't ignore the effort Dorian was making, the steady presence in therapy, the humility in his voice, the visible cracks in the pride he once wore like armor. Yet, their doubts weighed on her. Each warning felt like a shadow cast across her fragile hope. Dorian faced his own battles, and they were no less brutal. Word had spread through his business circles about his attempts at reconciliation. Some colleagues mocked him quietly, calling his efforts weakness. "Family drama doesn't mix well with boardrooms," one investor told him coldly. "You should focus on growth, not on chasing a past that's already closed." Others were harsher. "You're risking credibility," a longtime associate warned. "The market doesn't forgive men who look distracted. Your enemies will use this against you." Dorian had spent years building his empire, projecting control and authority. Now, every move he made for Sabrina and Grace seemed to chip away at that carefully crafted image. Yet, for the first time in his life, he didn't care. At a late-night meeting, after a particularly heated exchange with a partner, he sat alone in his office, staring at the city skyline. Once, these lights filled him with pride. Now, they reminded him of the nights he chose ambition over love. The thought made his chest tighten with regret. Meanwhile, Sabrina found herself in the middle of two worlds, her private healing and the public eye that refused to let her live quietly. Friends continued to remind her of the risks, urging her to keep distance. Strangers speculated about her decisions as though her life were theirs to dissect. "Why should anyone else decide what forgiveness looks like for me?" she whispered to herself one night, standing by the window after putting Grace to bed. But doubt crept in. What if they were right? She thought back to her own journey, the years she fought to reclaim her independence and peace. Letting Dorian back in felt like walking on glass. One wrong step could cut everything open again. For Dorian, the test came not in boardrooms but in his response to the criticism. He began declining certain meetings, telling colleagues that his family was his focus. "You're throwing away influence," one of them scoffed. Dorian only replied, "If influence costs me my daughter's trust, it isn't worth the price." His honesty shocked those who had known him only as a relentless businessman. Some turned away, unwilling to stand by a man who no longer played by their rules. Others watched with cautious respect, curious if he would follow through. Still, the pressure took its toll. One evening, during a therapy session, Dorian admitted, "Part of me wants to fight back, to prove them all wrong. But I know that's just the old me, the man who always had to win. I don't want to win anymore." I just want peace with you and Grace. Sabrina studied him, searching for signs of performance. But what she saw was exhaustion, raw and unguarded. Public scrutiny didn't stop at whispered gossip or boardroom tension. Even Grace, in her innocence, noticed the way people spoke differently when her father was around. "Why do people look at us funny when Daddy's there?" she asked one afternoon. Sabrina knelt beside her. "Because adults sometimes talk too much about things they don't understand. What matters is how we treat each other at home, not what they say out there." It was a reminder Sabrina needed as much as Grace. The weeks pressed on, each day bringing new struggles and judgment from friends, cold shoulders in social circles, and constant reminders of the risk she was taking. Yet through it all, Sabrina couldn't deny the steady presence Dorian maintained. He didn't disappear when things grew difficult. He didn't lash out when accused of weakness. He stayed, even when staying cost him respect in places he once valued most. For Sabrina, that quiet resilience spoke louder than the gossip. Still, doubt lingered in her heart like an unwelcome guest, reminding her of the stakes each time she allowed him closer. As the city whispered, as friends warned, as colleagues judged, the real question began to sharpen within her. Could forgiveness survive not only private wounds but also public weight? The first time Dorian attended one of Grace's school events, the air felt heavier than usual. Sabrina had warned him, "You're here for Grace. No grand gestures, no distractions." He nodded, understanding that his presence was already more than Grace had expected. When he walked into the brightly decorated auditorium, his usually confident stride was slowed by nerves. He took a seat toward the back, keeping his head down until Grace stepped on stage. The little girl spotted him almost instantly, her face lighting up in a way that caught Sabrina off guard. Grace's eyes sparkled, and her tiny wave in his direction said more than words could. For Dorian, that wave was everything. It pierced through the noise of judgment, the whispers of business partners, the shadows of past mistakes. In that moment, he wasn't the powerful man Atlanta once feared or respected. He was simply a father, overwhelmed by the pure joy of being acknowledged by his daughter. After the performance, Sabrina watched as Grace rushed into his arms. For a second, it felt almost natural, almost right. The sight pulled at something deep inside her, the part of her that still remembered the man she once loved. But those moments of warmth were followed by nights of doubt. At home, Sabrina often found herself replaying old memories, the arguments, the betrayal, the coldness in his eyes when he believed Eleanor's lies. The ache of those days hadn't fully healed, and she wasn't sure if it ever would. Some nights, she sat awake after Grace had fallen asleep, staring at the quiet house she had built from the ground up. Could she really risk opening that door again? Dorian sensed her hesitation, and though it hurt, he didn't push. Instead, he showed up in smaller ways, helping with Grace's homework during visits, sharing quiet dinners where conversation flowed gently, offering to carry groceries without expectation of thanks. These gestures weren't grand but steady, the kind that built trust brick by brick. Still, Sabrina's walls remained high. During a family therapy session, she finally voiced the fear she had carried for years. "I'm afraid that if I forgive you, you'll break me again. I don't know if I can survive that twice." The room fell silent. Dorian leaned forward, his voice unshaken but heavy with sincerity. "I don't expect you to forget. I just want a chance to show you that I'm not the man I was. I know I don't deserve easy forgiveness, but I'll keep showing up until you believe me or until you tell me to stop." Grace, sitting between them, looked up with wide eyes. "Does that mean we can be like other families?" she asked softly. The question pierced Sabrina's heart. She wanted to protect her daughter from disappointment, but she also couldn't deny the longing in Grace's voice. In the weeks that followed, Sabrina allowed a little more room for Dorian, though never without caution. They shared a few dinners where Grace giggled between them, filling the silence with her innocence. Dorian listened more than he spoke, absorbing every detail of Grace's stories about school and friends, every glance Sabrina offered across the table. There were moments where Sabrina almost let herself relax, watching him help Grace with a science project, hearing the sound of their laughter echoing down the hall. For brief flashes of time, it seemed possible that their fractured family could mend. But the past was never far. During one dinner, when Grace ran off to play after eating, Sabrina caught herself studying Dorian's face. A wave of anger and grief rose within her, uninvited. She saw not just the man in front of her, but also the memory of the man who had turned away when she needed him most. The betrayal replayed like a scar that refused to fade. Later that night, she sat alone in her room, whispering to herself, "Can love survive this much damage?" The question lingered until a late autumn evening, when everything seemed to collide. Sabrina was locking up for the night, her home bathed in quiet shadows, when a knock sounded at the door. She hesitated, already knowing who it was. Opening it, she found Dorian standing there. He wasn't dressed in a suit or carrying flowers. He looked ordinary, almost vulnerable, his shoulders slightly slumped, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. "I know it's late," he said softly, "but I couldn't wait any longer. I've been patient, I've respected your space, but I need to ask you one more time. Can we try again? Not for me, not even just for Grace, but because I believe we still have something worth saving." The cool night air pressed against her skin as Sabrina stood frozen in the doorway. Her heart pounded, torn between the warmth of his persistence and the weight of her fears. Inside the house, Grace stirred in her sleep, unaware of the decision that could change everything. Sabrina's lips parted, but no words came out. The silence stretched, heavy with possibility, leaving only one question in the air. Would she open the door to her past, or close it forever? The night felt still, almost heavy, as Sabrina stood at her doorway facing the man she once thought she would spend forever with. Dorian's eyes searched hers, carrying an honesty she hadn't seen in years. For weeks, he had been steady, never forcing, never demanding, and simply showing up in small but meaningful ways. Yet tonight, his voice carried a finality, as if he knew this was his last chance. Sabrina hesitated. Her mind was torn between two lives, the life she had carefully rebuilt with strength and independence, and the one she had once dreamed of sharing with him, before betrayal shattered it all. She thought of those sleepless nights in the Ritz-Carlton when she was pregnant and alone. She thought of the birth of Grace, the snowstorm outside, and the space where Dorian should have been. She thought of every insult Eleanor had whispered, every lie carefully planted to poison their love. Her chest tightened as she remembered the moment Dorian handed her the forged evidence, his eyes filled with doubt instead of faith. The wound it left still lingered. It wasn't only betrayal, but it was abandonment. To trust him again meant reopening scars that had barely healed. But then she thought of Grace. Their daughter had become the light of her world, her reason for pushing forward. Grace's innocence carried a hope that Sabrina sometimes struggled to believe in. Just hours before, Grace had asked her a simple question while brushing her doll's hair. "Mommy, can families be fixed?" The words echoed now, tugging at Sabrina's heart. Grace didn't know the full weight of the past, but her longing for something whole pressed against Sabrina's guarded soul. Dorian's voice broke the silence. "Sabrina," he said, his tone stripped of pride, "I was blind. I let my mother's lies destroy us, and I failed you when you needed me most. Every day since, I've carried that regret. I've been in therapy, I've worked to confront my weakness, but none of it means anything if you can't see it too. I know I don't deserve you, but I need you to know if I would spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man you and Grace deserve." Tears welled in Sabrina's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had promised herself long ago that she would never again give away her power so easily. Yet here he stood, stripped of arrogance, admitting his failures without excuse. She took a step back, her mind racing. The house behind her represented safety, stability, and the future she had fought for. The man before her represented a risk, one that could either heal or destroy her again. The silence stretched, interrupted only by the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Sabrina's grip on the door tightened, her knuckles white. Grace's small footsteps pattered down the hallway, and a sleepy voice called, "Mommy? Who's at the door?" Sabrina turned slightly, her heart pounding. Grace appeared, rubbing her eyes, her curls messy from sleep. She spotted Dorian instantly. A smile lit her face as she whispered, "Daddy." The word cut through Sabrina like a blade and a bomb all at once. Grace had never used it so freely before. She ran toward him without hesitation, wrapping her arms around his legs. Dorian knelt, pulling her into his embrace, his shoulders shaking as he held her close. Sabrina stood frozen, her throat tight. It was the sight of them together, Grace's innocent joy and Dorian's raw emotion, which broke her composure. She turned away for a moment, wiping at her eyes, unwilling to let them see her crumble. Dorian looked up at her, still holding Grace. His voice cracked as he spoke, "I don't want to just be a visitor in her life. I want to be a father. But more than that, I want to be the partner you needed, the partner you deserved back then. I can't change the past, but I can fight for the future if you'll let me." Sabrina drew in a long, shaky breath. Her heart warred with her mind. She remembered the strength it took to stand alone, to face the world when everyone whispered against her. She remembered vowing never to let anyone hold power over her peace again. And yet, watching Grace cling to her father, hearing the hope in her daughter's voice, she couldn't deny that this moment mattered. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down. For the first time, she realized this decision wasn't only about her pain or Dorian's guilt, but it was about the future of the little girl whose laughter filled her home. Her voice came out steady, though her heart was unsteady. "This isn't just about forgiveness, Dorian. It's about whether I can trust you not to break us again." Dorian met her gaze, no longer defensive, no longer proud. "Then let me prove it. Not in words. In actions. For as long as it takes." Grace looked between them, sensing the tension but smiling as though her wish had already come true. She whispered again, "Families can be fixed, right, Mommy?" Sabrina's chest ached at the innocence of the question. She wanted to answer, but the truth was, she didn't know. Standing in the doorway, Sabrina realized she had reached the turning point of her life. Whether she chose to open the door fully or close it forever, nothing would ever be the same again. Sabrina stood in front of the mirror that night, her reflection showing a woman who had weathered storms and carried scars but also radiated strength she never thought she would need. She traced the faint lines of exhaustion near her eyes, remembering the months she had spent holding herself together when Dorian chose his mother's lies over her truth. Those nights had been filled with quiet tears, whispered prayers, and a determination that Grace would never feel unwanted or unloved. Now, as Dorian's plea for a second chance echoed in her mind, she felt both the pull of memory and the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest. The choice was not simple. On one hand stood the possibility of mending a family, offering her daughter a chance to see her parents side by side, sharing milestones as one. On the other stood her hard-earned peace, her independence, and the knowledge that opening the door again might lead to new wounds if history repeated itself. She could not decide out of nostalgia or loneliness. She had to make it out of clarity. The following morning, she asked Dorian to meet her at the small park where Grace often played. The space was quiet, with only a few children chasing each other across the grass. Sabrina arrived first, her heart steady but her mind rehearsing every word she needed to say. When Dorian walked up, his eyes carried the same mixture of hope and fear she had seen many times in recent weeks. He held no flowers, no gifts, only his bare honesty. That, at least, was a sign he had listened when she told him grand gestures meant nothing without true change. He sat across from her on the bench, his posture uncertain, his hands clenched together. "Thank you for meeting me," he said quietly, his voice heavy with a humility that had once been absent. Sabrina met his gaze with calm firmness. "You've asked me for forgiveness. You've shown me letters, attended therapy, and tried to prove you're not the same man who let me down. But before I give you an answer, I need you to hear mine without interruption." He nodded, swallowing the words that wanted to escape. She took a breath. "When you believed your mother's lies, you didn't just hurt me. You left me carrying our child alone, doubting myself, and rebuilding every piece of my life from the ground up. That pain doesn't disappear just because you've realized your mistake. Forgiveness isn't a key that unlocks the past. It's a door that must be rebuilt plank by plank. I will not put myself or Grace in a place where our peace depends on whether you stumble again." Dorian's face tightened with regret, but he said nothing. "Grace deserves stability," Sabrina continued. "She deserves to see love that doesn't come with conditions or apologies every other day. She deserves to know that her mother values herself enough to walk away if respect isn't given. That's the standard I will live by. So my decision isn't just about you, it's about the example I set for her." Her words cut through the silence of the park, heavy yet steady. For a moment, the only sound was children laughing in the distance, a stark contrast to the weight of what hung between them. Dorian finally exhaled, his voice trembling. "So, is that your way of saying no?" Sabrina closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again with resolve. "It's my way of saying that if I let you back into my life, it won't be because I'm lonely or because Grace asked questions I couldn't answer. It will be because you've proven, over time, that your actions match your words. This isn't about starting over. It's about building something new, slowly, carefully, and on my terms. If you want that chance, you'll have to live with patience. If you can't, then the door is closed for good." The mixture of relief and sorrow that crossed Dorian's face was striking. He had not been completely rejected, but neither had he been welcomed back with open arms. This was a conditional acceptance, one built on boundaries that left no room for complacency. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking, "for even considering it. I'll wait as long as it takes." Sabrina stood, her decision made clear not by an embrace or a final dismissal, but by the strength of her boundaries. She reached into her bag, pulled out a set of neatly written guidelines, her expectations for co-parenting, therapy schedules, and limitations on personal access to her life. She handed it to him calmly. "If you want to try, this is where it starts. Respect it, or don't bother showing up again." Dorian looked at the paper as though it were both a lifeline and a test he wasn't sure he could pass. But he nodded, his hands trembling as he held it. Grace came running toward them then, her laughter ringing out as she threw herself into Sabrina's arms. She looked up at her father, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Mommy, is Daddy staying?" Sabrina kissed her daughter's cheek gently, holding her close. "Daddy is learning how to be here the right way," she said softly. The little girl accepted the answer without question, leaning her head on her mother's shoulder. Dorian's eyes filled with tears, not of triumph but of realization that forgiveness, if it was to come at all, would not be handed to him. It had to be earned, every single day. That night, when Sabrina lay in bed, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. Whether Dorian succeeded or failed was no longer her burden to carry. She had drawn the line, set the standard, and chosen a path where her self-respect came first. For the first time in a long while, she felt free, not because of his apology, but because of her decision. In the weeks that followed Sabrina's decision, life began to unfold in quiet but meaningful ways. The path was not smooth, nor was it free of shadows from the past, but it was hers to shape. When she allowed Dorian the cautious chance to prove himself, it did not mean the return of romance overnight. Instead, it meant shared spaces with clear boundaries. He joined them at Grace's school recital, sitting in the back row, clapping louder than anyone when she finished her song. Sabrina watched him through the corner of her eye, measuring not his performance as a father in that moment, but his consistency in the days that followed. He did not flood her with empty apologies anymore. Instead, he showed up on time for therapy sessions, listened without defensiveness, and asked questions that revealed he was truly trying to understand the depth of the wounds he had caused. Grace, young and eager, acted as the small bridge between them. She asked simple questions like, "Can Daddy come to dinner?" or "Do families stay broken forever?" The questions that cut through years of hurt with the innocence only a child could carry. Sometimes those questions made Sabrina's chest ache, but they also reminded her of why she set her boundaries so firmly. Every answer she gave was not just for Grace's understanding but also for her own healing. Healing, however, did not mean forgetting. There were nights when Sabrina lay awake, remembering the loneliness of her pregnancy, the silence of her phone when she needed him most, and the cruel satisfaction in Eleanor's eyes when she realized her lies had taken root. Even when Dorian stood humbly before her, those memories rose uninvited, pressing against her heart like an old wound reopening. It was during those moments that Sabrina reminded herself. Forgiveness was not about erasing the past, it was about creating space to live in the present without being chained to it. The reconciliation, cautious as it was, began to show glimmers of hope. They shared small dinners at Sabrina's apartment, laughter rising when Grace insisted on saying grace twice, or when Dorian burned the rice trying to impress them with a new recipe. The scars between them were still there, sharp and visible, but slowly, carefully, new layers of trust began to form over them. For Sabrina, the victory was not that Dorian was back in her life. The victory was that she had chosen this path on her terms, not out of pressure or fear, but out of strength. That distinction made all the difference. But what if her decision had been different? If Sabrina had closed the door permanently, life would have carried forward in another form of strength. She would have continued pouring her energy into architecture, where her projects were beginning to gain national attention. She had already been shortlisted for a major contract in Atlanta, a cultural center that aimed to blend innovation with community values. Her designs were bold, reflecting her resilience, and her story of overcoming betrayal quietly inspired the young women she mentored in her firm. Grace would still have thrived, wrapped in the warmth of her mother's love and steadiness. Without Dorian in the picture, Sabrina would have leaned more on her circle of close friends, who admired her not just for her talent but for her courage. She would have been proof that a woman could raise a child, lead a successful career, and never compromise her peace for the sake of appearances. And Dorian? His journey would have been marked by regret, but also by a newfound sense of purpose. Stripped of the chance to rebuild with Sabrina, he might have turned his energy outward, using his influence and wealth to support causes that addressed fractured families and parental alienation. His regret would never leave him. It would be the quiet weight he carried into every speech, every donation, and every sleepless night. In his own way, he would transform his failure into activism, but no accomplishment would erase the truth. He lost the family that once could have been his foundation. In both paths, one truth remained the same. Eleanor was left disgraced and forgotten. The woman who had spun lies to protect her pride became the cautionary tale whispered about in private gatherings. Those who once saw her as a matriarch of high society now avoided her presence, unwilling to be tainted by the shadow of her cruelty. She lived in silence, surrounded not by admiration but by the emptiness that comes when deception consumes every bond. Her name, once a weapon, now carries only shame. Sabrina rarely thought of Eleanor anymore. When she did, it was not with bitterness but with quiet resolve. Eleanor's downfall served as a reminder that the power of truth, though often delayed, always prevails. Sabrina chose not to let that woman define her. Instead, she allowed her story to stand as a message that lies may break trust, but they cannot bury resilience. Whether reconciliation bloomed in fragile steps or the door closed forever, Sabrina's journey reached the same conclusion. She was not the woman who begged for love or validation. She was the woman who set the terms, raised her child with dignity, and walked forward knowing her worth. The consequences of her choice, whichever path unfolded, became less about Dorian or Eleanor and more about the legacy Sabrina built for Grace. She wanted her daughter to grow up understanding that strength did not mean refusing to forgive, nor did it mean blindly forgetting. Strength meant knowing the value of peace, the power of boundaries, and the courage to choose what served her life best. That was the legacy, whether in a home slowly pieced back together or in one held steady by a single hand. Sabrina's decision ensured that Grace would inherit not the pain of betrayal but the wisdom of resilience. Sabrina's journey was never about choosing between perfection and failure. It was about facing the pain of betrayal, the complexity of forgiveness, and the responsibility of building a stable life for her child. Her choices, whether to cautiously open the door for Dorian or to stand firmly on her own, showed that life does not give us clear paths marked with certainty. Instead, it presents crossroads where every step forward demands courage. Forgiveness is not a simple yes or no. It is layered, shaped by time, reflection, and the scars we carry. For some, it may mean giving someone the chance to show they have truly changed. For others, it may mean walking away without bitterness, holding peace as the ultimate gift to oneself. Sabrina's story proves that both answers are valid, because strength is not measured by whether you reconcile, but by whether you protect your dignity and your future. Trust, once broken, rarely returns untouched. It takes patience, honesty, and accountability to rebuild, and even then, it may never look the same. Yet Sabrina's life reminds us that trust, even when fractured, does not define our worth. We define our worth by how we respond, how we rise, and how we ensure the next chapter is guided by wisdom instead of wounds. Resilience is not about never being hurt. It is about refusing to let hurt become your permanent home. Sabrina raised her daughter with love, pursued her dreams in architecture, and carried herself with grace despite betrayal. Whether she chose reconciliation or stood alone, the legacy she built was the same. A legacy of courage, self-respect, and the unshakable truth that no lie can destroy a determined heart. Her story leaves us with a question that touches every viewer differently. When someone who once broke your trust comes back seeking forgiveness, what do you do? Do you open the door to let them try again, or do you keep the boundary that protects your peace? There is no universal answer, only the answer each of us must give when our moment comes. So I leave you with this. What lesson do you take from Sabrina and Dorian's journey? Would you have made the same choice she did? Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing your voices from all around the world. And don't forget, tomorrow we'll bring you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that inspire, enlighten, and stay with you long after they're told. Until we meet again in our next story, may blessings follow you wherever you go. Take care, stay inspired, and keep that beautiful curiosity alive. See you soon, dear friend.